remember the first time seeing his name up there with Drake, Juice, Taylor Swift in that top 5 in the world. Juice wasn't trying to be that. Juice just became that. He's making good music.
When you a fan of this shit, you look at it from a certain perspective, but then when you in it, you see it for what it really is. I'm still happy I get to change the world, but it's not what it looked like.
He was so good at articulating his feelings. We ain't realized that's the way he feeling, cause it's turned into so much beautiful art. It was hard to separate the two.
You know, you tell whoever that you feel like you got anxiety, you feel like you got depression, they don't look at you like you crazy. That's not how it should be. That's how it is, and that needs to change. And hopefully I'm one of those people that could bring that change. Sometimes the shit gets overwhelming, but this is what I asked for. I say certain things so I can have conversations with my friends. If people get it and it relates to their life, then there's nothing for them to get that shit.
Juice was a therapist for millions of kids, a voice of that generation.
I want to say thank you and I love you to all my supporters out there. This is your world. You can do whatever you want to do.
My name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today we are talking to the fantastic Tommy Oliver about his new HBO documentary. We're going to kick things off by introducing you to the AAFCA members who are on the call today, starting with our facilitator, Rhonda Rasha Penrice in Atlanta, Nancy Green in Baltimore, Carolyn Hines in Toronto, and Jill Monroe in Los Angeles. I'm going to let you guys do what you do so well, and I will see you on the other side.
Jill Monroe with YouTube Stiletto Jill. So being that Juice WRLD is such a fresh, as far as one of our losses in hip hop, what was it about this project that was different for you at the start of it? And then when you finally got to the outcome was unexpected?
He was a really special person. He really was. And I know a little bit of it going in, but I really didn't understand until I got deeply into it. And so from the music side of it, there's nobody like him. The way that he created, the way that he was able to do so much in a way that was completely atypical. There's nobody like him. And I think one of the early things that I gravitated toward was just how vulnerable he was in his music. And it wasn't this machismo talking about how hard he was and all these other things. He was talking about heartbreak and depression and struggling with so many things. And for him to use his platform in the ways that he did, I just thought it was really incredible. And then the more that I got into it, the more that I realized, again, he is the GOAT freestyler. Like, it's insane. The stuff that he was able to do was just absolutely insane, while being an incredibly kind, sweet, and goofy person who was also in a committed relationship as a 19 or 20-year-old rock star, which is just insane.
Hi, Tommy. Carolyn first. So here's what happened in Carolyn Talks podcast. So what did you learn about Juice WRLD throughout the documentary, and how did you use that to connect to the music and using the music for the documentary? Because his last record serves as a soundtrack for the documentary. So like, how did what you learned about him guide you in selecting the songs to use for the film?
It was very much wanting to use his music. In a way, his freestyles and his music operate as his sit-down interview in the documentary, where if you listen to the very first freestyle, he tells you everything you need to know. He tells you what he's dealing with. He tells you what he's going through. He tells you what's about to happen. He tells you all of it. And so I wanted to find a way for me to essentially get out of the way, for him to be able to tell his story in as honest of a manner as possible. And so the music just became figuring out like what supported that in terms of what we had, what we could find, what was correct in terms of chronology, and just really trying to allow him to tell his story as much as possible.
Was there any song in particular that stood out to you and that meant the most to you of all of the songs?
I really love the opening freestyle. And part of it is that it's one of the best songs I've ever heard. And he just made that shit up right there. And that was it. He just made it up. That was all there was to it. And so I think there was something so special to that. I really like the acoustic version of Fast, where again, he tells you all of what's going on and it's so well done. I like the freestyle that he does in Australia is also crazy. And in that it's a pre-existing track and he is rapping on the track and then there's a space and he comes in and he freestyles and he fucking nails it perfectly in that amount of time perfectly. Then he passes to himself on the track and then he picks it back up and he goes back in. And it's just insane from an artistry perspective. And so, but there's a lot of that because that's just how he operated.
Hi, Nancy Green with Film Critique. And yeah, this was a really interesting documentary to me because I didn't know as much about him. I knew about him, I knew his music and things like that, but you know, there were so many intricacies in what he was going through and how he dealt with his issues. And I was wondering, do you see that this is maybe kind of a trend in the industry? Because there seem to be a lot of very talented young musicians who, you know, they're dying young. And I found that it was so just disturbing the way that he seemed to kind of talk about that a lot, talk about feeling like he was going to die. So can you go into that a bit more?
It's the worst kind of trend if it is a trend. And it's just, I don't even know what to call it. It's a terrible thing. And it's the sort of thing that a lot of people, music industry, media, individuals, etc., have kind of become a bit numb to because it sort of keeps happening. And it's also something that for one reason or another, like he talked about not expecting to be around long. You know, the idea of what's a 27 club? We're not gonna make it past 21. And so I think that it's just a hard thing. It's a hard thing. You've got somebody who was 19 and 20 years old throughout the film, who has all the access in the world, like all the access in the world. And it's just a lot to be able to figure out how to deal with stuff. And Polo G talks about it at the end of the film. It's like, you know, before we're struggling to be able to pay for stuff. Now you can get as much as you want, basically. And how do you deal with that? Because your problems don't go away. You still have problems. You just now have unlimited access to everything. And so there's no answer. There's no easy answer. It's just really hard. And I think that when anybody sees the signs, we should do as much as we can to support the individuals. I think ultimately people are going to make their own decisions, but creating a support structure around it and understanding that these things are possible and trying to protect against them as much as a record company can or anybody, I think is important, because we can't say that, oh man, I never thought something like this could happen. No, there are plenty of people who have passed away. And so I think that we can't just turn a blind eye.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Rhonda here. How did you deal with the drug culture? Like in this generation, especially with this genre of hip hop, there is a lot of Molly, PCP. How did you deal with the drug culture?
So one of the first conversations I had with his mom, we talked for a while. We talked about a lot of things, including the fact that my mother was addicted to drugs from the time I was 4 until 10. And so I've got intimate knowledge of being around sort of the impact of these things. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that by telling the story in his own words, it wasn't about judgment one way or the other. It was about, it's his story. It's what's going on. It's what he is experiencing. And he's telling you about it. He's telling you why he's taking drugs. He's telling you all of what's going on. And so for me, the only thing that I wanted to do was to not glamorize drugs. But beyond that, I just wanted to be able to show things as they happened. And if you think about, by the time you get to the plane sequence, even if you knew nothing about Juice going into this film, you love that kid by the time you get to that point. You really do. He's such a kind, sweet kid who just cares and means well. But when you get to that scene, it is fucking heartbreaking. It is. And so it was about adding context. It's about not just drugs flippantly, it's about understanding the impact, it's about understanding the decisions, it's about understanding all of those things. And if you have the drug use but no context, well, then it's just like, okay, like what are we saying? What are we doing? But to understand the person, to understand what's going on, it's fucking heartbreaking. And it really is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a bit of, I guess, where I was or where I am with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the very honest answer.
Jill Monroe again. Tommy, you mentioned talking with his family. Wanted to know what their input was as far as this project, and was there any area or aspect that they wanted to ensure was included or highlighted as far as him as a person outside?
So his mom, Carmela, was incredibly supportive throughout the entire process. And his brother also, Brian. And she was very happy with the film. And I think the whole thing for her was that she just wanted to make sure that he was seen for who he was. Because for all of us in the world, he's Juice WRLD. For her, he's still Jared. And there was a side of him that most people didn't get to see. And so, which was just the fun, loving, goofy side. And so that was really it. So like she didn't have any mandates, she didn't have anything, but I did, after I had a cut, I went to Chicago and watched the film with her and I, and because I wanted to make sure she was okay with it, because it's a lot to watch. It's a lot to understand what actually happened. But for me, I wanted to portray him accurately. And she was very happy with that portrayal.
Hi, Tommy, Carolyn again. I want to talk a bit more about the music and about how his music influenced him as a person and how it influenced other people, because like he's known as one of the pioneers of the emo rap genre, and he was extremely young when he made such a massive impact on the rap industry, because reading in the research, I think one of his songs got over 1 billion streams on Spotify, and he's one of the few solo artists to be able to make such a massive impact on the digital age. Like we know For instance, in the 80s and early 90s, we would have had Tupac Shakur, who is one of his icons. And for you personally, as like we know, like hip hop has such a big impact on Black culture. How did that affect you personally, being doing a documentary on someone who also has such a big impact on the music culture? Like, what was it like for you being able to work on this film and working about telling the story of someone who has such an impact on the Black music culture?
I don't have an easy answer for that one. And I think a lot of it comes down to wanting to tell his story accurately. I keep going back to that. And it's him and his story and not a music industry story. It's not this is something that has to say so much about everybody else. It's him and the things that were important to him, and him being able to speak for himself. And so I think that the understanding how massive his fan base is, how massive his songs are. I mean, he's got multiple songs over 1 billion streams. He's the number 3 artist in the country on Spotify behind Drake and Taylor Swift. That's before his album dropped. And so I think there's no ignoring that he was and is very important to people and wanting to do right by them. But I think that it was wanting to tell his story with enough detail and specificity that the audience would enjoy it, but also just wanting to tell his story and offer insight into what was going on in a way that was a little bit not really trying to do everything else. And so it's just telling his story.
I wanted to know, what do you think that his impact will be on future generations of musicians? And do you think that future generations, musicians will maybe take into consideration the things that happened to him when they're going on their own path in music?
So I think his impact musically is already being felt quite a bit. And there are dozens of artists who are trying to essentially emulate the Juice WRLD sound, and either the sound or the feel or the emotion. And I think he, in many ways, ushered in being able to be vulnerable with the type of music that he was making. And there are other people who follow in his footsteps. And I think that it's great. It's great to be able to actually see people who look like us talk about these things and not pretend like it's not happening. Mm-hmm. I also think that in many ways, it's a cautionary tale. And hopefully, I was like, how many fucking cautionary tales do you need? And so like, this sort of thing can't keep happening. And so we've seen it. We're seeing it up close, and hopefully we take the hard lessons.
Hey, Tommy, can you expound upon his international impact and how that was important for you to include? And also kind of speak a little bit, one of the things that's in this doc is you have a real good collection of, some of the younger artists like Corday, GHerbo. I mean, these are really important figures, and I don't think that we've necessarily seen them all in one spot before.
Mm-hmm. So he was number 3 in the US this year, but he is top 10 in the world on Spotify still. And so his international presence is nuts. And he toured quite a bit outside of the US and had quite a large fan base outside of the US, and he loved them. He loved going to Europe. He loved going to Australia. He loved spending a lot of time in other places. And so it was something that was definitely important. And you wouldn't believe how many DMs I've gotten asking Jess, hey, I'm not in the US, where can I watch this? Hey, I'm here, where can I watch this? Hey, I'm here, where can I watch this? And so wanting to make sure that it was a film that worked for those things. And it was always important to HBO, like thinking about what the other territories will look like as well.
And the collection of other young artists in this genre.
So that was the thing that was really cool. And so it's like somebody like Apollo G, who's super popular now, but he was somebody that Juice saw as being very talented and just wanted to support him before anybody knew who he was. Same thing with somebody like Corday, even though they're closer in age. And so, or GHerbo was sort of the opposite. He grew up watching and listening to GHerbo or Lil Baby. And one of the other things that was really cool for him was the people that he grew up watching, GHerbo or Tyler the Creator or all these other people, he very quickly became of similar, if not larger stature. But for him, it never mattered. Like, it was just, he was so fucking excited to be able to be around them, to be around somebody like a Lucky X from Chicago or I Love McConan. And I think that it just speaks to him and his authenticity, and the circle now is like of course his fucking friends are gonna fucking kill it, because he was somebody who could spot talent because real recognizes real.
Yeah, Lil Herb, GHerbo, like when I would go home, my little cousins put me up on him. So like, and on the outside world, people don't know that impact. So, And then Juice WRLD, definitely. I was in Chicago after he passed.
So we've talked a bit about his connection to his fans and that his fan base is international. So when they finally get to view and take this in, since a lot of their connection with him was through heartbreak and emo music, what do you hope that they take away from this as a fan base overall, or for themselves? Because they look to him for inspiration in a ways, but that connection was in a lot of sorrow. So even though his story ended as such, where do they kind of go from here?
So his music was more than just emo or sad boy music. And I think that he can sometimes be miscategorized as only that. But he had a lot of things. He had lots of hype songs. He had lots of party songs. He had lots of things. And so I think that it really depends person to person. And so you can listen to Juice WRLD and listen to only party songs. You can listen to Juice WRLD and listen to only sad boy songs. You can listen to Juice WRLD and you can listen to only hard songs. And so I think that was a bit of his genius, in that he was able to do all of those things authentically and do them well. And so I don't know that I could say that, the international audience is this one thing, or this one territory is this one thing. I think that a lot of people will take different things from the film the same way they took different things from him.
We've talked, of course, about the music. I want you to talk a bit about the process of making this film, like how you became involved and what was your first steps to creating this documentary. And was there anything that you did differently to how you would have than how you've done your previous films? Like, was there a special sense that you went into it with? Because since it's more music centered, was there anything about that particularly that you were like, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it versus how I've done it before?
This thing was hard as hell. It really was. I got dumped a hard drive with 8,000 clips and probably 250 hours of footage. And this was January of this year. And they were like, so we can air this in December of this year, right? And I was like, are you fucking crazy? I was like, no. I told HBO no. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And they were like, okay. And they came back again. They were like, so, not pushing, but like, if there's a way we can get in December, it'd be great. And I was like, not promising. So I had to figure out a process in order to understand what we had. And it was literally impossible to watch every single thing and not take, I don't know, 3 years or so. And so we had to create a system where we distributed the workload in a way that we could categorize, we could tag, we could rate, we could do everything through all of these clips. And that took several months of figuring out how to actually do that and then to actually do it. And as we were going through that process, I had no idea what the film was or what the structure would be. I had no idea at all. And I really enjoyed sort of hearing him talk and seeing him do his thing. And I think reasonably early on, I sort of wondered if it was possible to tell his story through the archival primarily, but I just didn't know if we had the footage to support it, because even though there was a lot of footage, the footage hadn't been shot for a documentary. And so there was a lot of things that were entirely unusable and just did not work, and things that were vital pieces of his story. And so I didn't know if we could do it. And so my partner and I, who I cut the film with, Joe Kehoe, we just dug in. And we just dug in and started playing with stuff. And I remember cutting the opening sequence. It was one of the first things that we cut. And I cut that probably back in May. And it's almost exactly what is in the film now. And like, that was what sort of finding that, making the decision to start with the freestyle sort of allowed us to find our footing and figure out what it would be. And then we just leaned into it. We leaned hard into being able to allow him to tell his story. And then with the interviews, I made the decision that the only people that you'd see via sit-down interviews were the people that you see in the archival. And so there are no talking heads opining about, what you should feel or what this thing means. It's Juice in his own words, and then the people who were important to him, not the people who were thought of being a part of his story, not the people who were around years prior, the people who he wanted around him, the people who spent time with him, and in sort of a Wizard of Oz kind of way, where you wake up and it's like, oh, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there too. And so that was the process. Also, crazy ass thing, I was producing a movie this summer called The Perfect Find with Gabrielle Union and Jim Torres and Lala and Aisha Hines and Keith Powers. And I was lead producing this big Netflix movie at the same time I was cutting this film. And so I built a little edit suite in my producer office because I moved from LA to New Jersey for this film. And I remember I'd be cutting this film, as in Juice WRLD Into the Abyss, on evenings and at night. And once we started shooting, if we were shooting in the evening, I would cut during the day and then go to set after. If we were shooting during the morning, I'd be shooting all day. And then I would go to the office after to cut and cut on weekends. And it was nuts. It was nuts.
So what you're saying is that your 2021 was crazy and you barely slept.
Yep, because we also produced another movie at the same time, which is an awesome movie, which will be out next year, and it was just bananas.
Well, you did it. You made it to the end, so congrats.
Thank you.
This question is, I wanted to know, do you think that things might have turned out differently for him or would turn out differently for other artists like him if they had approached or if it was possible to approach being in the music industry differently without maybe some of the big concerts or like huge entourage, not the people that he wanted around him, but the extra people that kind of get put there maybe. That was something that I was curious about in watching it, because in the documentary it talks about how he just he didn't know initially that you could just go into a studio and record music. He thought someone had to put you there, but he did that himself. And that's kind of how his career came about. So do you think it would have been differently if he had been able to kind of do things more in that way than going about the traditional music route?
I think that it's complex, because I think there is a certain level of responsibility for people around young artists to support them and for there to be an infrastructure, given that we know these types of things can happen. That said, Juice was going to do whatever he wanted to do. And so it is not a straightforward thing. And there was a time where G Money was somebody who was very important to Juice, and he was the person who found him. He was the person he looked at like a big brother. And at some point, G Money got pushed out because he was pushing too much. And that made everybody else who was around him think, well, if G Money can get pushed out, I mean, I can't say shit. And so it's a weird dynamic that there's no easy answer for. And so it's, again, Juice is going to do whatever he was going to do, but I still think that there is a responsibility for people who are older and more experienced to create guardrails and infrastructure as much as possible.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
This was a very good documentary. I thought it was done differently without having a lot of interviews in between, but I really liked that, and sort of the conclusion at the end where everyone was weighing in. Yeah, it was very, very good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, it's Rhonda again. Given that you spent time in kind of this, docu-series, documentary space with Black Love and 40 Years a Prisoner, which was excellent, by the way. Like, what is kind of the through line between these different projects for you? What binds them all?
Love. When you think about it, Black Love is kind of obvious. 40 Years a Prisoner is love of a kid and his parents, also parents and their love. And Juice, love and authentic representation. And so with Juice, one of the things that, love it or hate it, he absolutely loved Allie and she loved him, and their relationship was their relationship. And so for somebody who was 19 and 20 years old and a rock star to choose to be in a committed relationship, I think spoke a lot about who he was. Again, were they good for each other? Maybe, maybe not. But it was what made him happy. And love for what he did, his love for the music, his love for his community, and then being able to authentically represent us. And so in watching this film, you see that he's so much more than just an artist. He's an incredible fucking artist. One of the best artists of all time. He's a good person. He's a great person and friend. And to go back to one of the reasons that Cody and I created Black Love was so that we could show authentic representation. And that doesn't mean just positive representation. It means authentic representation that's not one-dimensional. And so I think that's a big part of it for me.
Yeah, it was definitely great to see that. Being a caring person. I think that we see a lot of that in this kind of some of the young artists coming up, that, you know, being kind to others, or like finding out how to be kind to yourself, you know, the environment, these things are important now.
I agree completely. And I'm also not making another doc next. Ain't happening.
Well, you know, I was going to ask you that, Tommy, because you are truly on a roll telling these important stories about our community. I mean, what are you doing next?
I've already turned down quite a bit of docs, but it ain't happening, and I am going to direct a film next.
But you do it so well.
You remember my first movie, 1982, which was
sure
a scripted film. Yep, Ken Rwanda, which I also produced. And so but no, I'm definitely not directing another doc next. And so it'll be a film, and I'll continue to produce stuff, and I'll direct another doc at some point, but I'm not doing it next.
Well, regardless of what you do, brother, we've got your back. We love your work. We love your vision, love your voice. Thank you so much for your time today. On behalf of the African American Film Critics Association, thank you for watching AAFCA Roundtables. Juice WRLD will be on HBO Max.
I appreciate you, Gil. I appreciate you always supporting me and us. And thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
See you soon.